If you drive 30 miles outside of Manhattan to a heavily guarded windowless data center in Mahwah, New Jersey, you will find the actual physical heart of American capitalism. It's not the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. It's a server farm, trillions of dollars, millions of trades, the lifeblood of the global economy, moving at the speed of light through fiber optic cables buried under the American soil. For a century, all the money in the world eventually flowed through America because America was the safest, most stable, most predictable place to park your capital. Today, those fiber optic cables are running cold because the money is flowing the other way. It is flowing north. At 4:15 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, 15 minutes after the closing bell rang in New York, the CEOs of the four largest banks in the United States, J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, and Goldman Sachs, released a joint filing to the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was 84 pages of dense legal jargon, but the executive summary contained a single paragraph that just detonated the American financial empire. The banks announced that effective at midnight tonight, they are shifting their primary international capital clearing and settlement operations out of New York to Toronto. They are bypassing the United States entirely. They are moving the plumbing of global finance to servers located in Markham, Ontario, operating under the regulatory jurisdiction of the Bank of Canada and protected by the sovereign laws of the Canadian government. The statement read, "To protect our global clients from arbitrary taxation, regulatory instability, and geopolitical interference, the consortium has established the Northern Clearing Settlement Hub in Toronto, Canada. This transition ensures the frictionless flow of global capital required to maintain international liquidity. We thank Prime Minister Carney and the Bank of Canada for providing the regulatory certainty necessary to stabilize global markets. Arbitrary taxation, regulatory instability, geopolitical interference. 3 phrases, 3 direct hits to the waterline of the USS Donald Trump. Everyone on Wall Street knew exactly what this meant. It meant we cannot process the world's money in a country where the president treats global finance like his personal ATM. It means we cannot defend the US dollar's reserve status when the man in the Oval Office is actively weaponizing it against our own clients. Wall Street, the ultimate symbol of American power, the engine that funds the US government, underwrites American corporations, and projects American dominance to the farthest corners of the globe. That engine just looked at Donald Trump's America First financial policies and said, "We can't afford to be American anymore." Mark Carney is systematically dismantling the American economic monopoly, and he isn't firing a shot. He is doing it with legislation, with banking charters, with zero-tax transit zones. He is doing it by being the adult in the room while the most powerful man on earth sets fire to his own currency. Donald Trump told you that a universal patriot tax on foreign capital would force the world to pay off the American national debt. He told you that because America is the biggest market on earth, global investors had no choice but to pay his tolls. He was playing Monopoly. The banks were playing quantum physics. In the next 45 minutes, I am going to show you exactly how the United States just lost control of global finance. I'm going to show you the leaked Federal Reserve memo that explicitly warned the White House this would happen. I'm going to show you the secret late-night meetings between Mark Carney and the titans of Wall Street that the Treasury Department tried to block and failed. I'm going to explain why the chairman of the Federal Reserve is currently in a state of absolute panic and why the interest rate on your mortgage is about to go up. You are watching the most significant financial defection since the British pound lost its reserve status in 1944. The architects of American capitalism just decided that America is no longer a safe place for capital. Don't look away. Segment 1, The Trigger. To understand why Wall Street just relocated the brain of global finance to Canada, you have to understand the math. Because Wall Street doesn't have an ideology, Wall Street has a fiduciary duty to math. 4 days ago, Trump happened to the US dollar. He signed the America First Capital Act. It mandated an immediate 2% transaction tax on all foreign capital clearing through U.S. financial institutions. The stated goal: tax the world to fund domestic tax cuts. Trump stood at a podium and declared that foreign countries were using our financial system for free, and it was time they paid their fair share. But Trump fundamentally misunderstands what money is in the 21st century. He thinks money is physical. He thinks it's gold bricks in a vault. He thinks Wall Street is trapped in Manhattan because the buildings are heavy. But money isn't physical. Money is data. Money is liquid, and liquidity does not tolerate friction. Let me tell you what a 2% tax means in global finance. Institutional trades are not measured in percentages. They are measured in basis points, fractions of a fraction of a percent. When a pension fund in Japan buys $1 billion of European bonds clearing through New York, the bank's profit margin is razor thin. When Trump imposed a 2% tax, he didn't capture 2% of the trade. He wiped out the profit margin of the entire global financial system. Overnight, clearing a trade in New York became the most expensive financial transaction on planet Earth. The banks had a choice: pass the 2% tax onto their international clients, which would instantly cause every foreign government and corporation to stop using American banks, or move the clearinghouse outside the U.S. border. They called Mark Carney, because Mark Carney isn't just a prime minister. He is the former governor of the Bank of Canada. He is the former governor of the Bank of England. He is quite literally the man who helped redesign the global financial system after the 2008 crash. There is no politician on earth who understands the plumbing of global capital better than Mark Carney. The call wasn't about politics. It was about rooting. The banks didn't ask for a favor. They asked for a server room and a legal charter. Carney gave them a sanctuary. Carney activated the Bay Street bypass. He introduced emergency legislation granting sovereign clearing status to the new consortium. He guaranteed zero transaction taxes on international capital flowing through Canadian servers. He guaranteed absolute legal immunity from U.S. executive orders. He guaranteed that the Canadian legal system would protect their capital from arbitrary seizure. Trump told Wall Street, "Pay me a toll for the privilege of being American." Carney told Wall Street, "Route your data through Toronto and keep your money." The decision wasn't emotional. It was actuarial. The banks calculated the Trump friction premium. It was going to cost them $400 billion a year in lost global business. They chose Canada because in global finance, you don't pay a premium for a chaotic president. You route around him. Segment 2, the receipts. We do evidence here, not outrage. Let's look at the hard data that proves this was a calculated lethal strike against American financial supremacy. Receipt 1, the Project Hamilton memo. This is a heavily redacted internal memo circulated among the Big Four banks 3 weeks ago, leaked to the Financial Times. It is the blueprint for the defection. The memo is titled Jurisdictional Risk and Capital Flight Contingency. It outlines the exact sequence of events that unfolded today. The memo explicitly classifies the United States Treasury Department as a Tier 1 unpredictable actor. Let that sink in. American banks classified the American government using the same risk designation they use for emerging market dictatorships. The text is cold and absolute. Given the executive branch's willingness to unilaterally weaponize clearing networks for political extortion, maintaining primary global settlement infrastructure on U.S. soil represents an unacceptable systemic risk to our fiduciary obligations. The transition of non-domestic clearing to the Toronto node must be completed before the Q3 taxation enforcement. Systemic risk. Wall Street just told its shareholders that Donald Trump is a systemic risk to the survival of their businesses. Receipt 2, the Bay Street framework. While Trump was boasting about his new tax on Truth Social, Mark Carney was quietly pushing the International Financial Stability Act through Parliament. This wasn't a standard banking law. This was a bespoke legal fortress built for Wall Street, the tax exemption. Canada guaranteed that any foreign capital passing through the Toronto hub, not destined for the Canadian domestic market, is 100% tax exempt forever. The Data Sovereignty Shield. Carney explicitly wrote into law that data housed on these Canadian clearing servers cannot be subpoenaed, seized, or frozen by U.S. federal authorities without a ruling from the Supreme Court of Canada. Trump's DOJ cannot touch it. The central bank backstop. The Bank of Canada opened a dedicated unlimited liquidity window for the consortium, ensuring that trades clear instantly, exactly as they did at the New York Fed. Trump tried to build a toll booth. Carney built a superhighway with diplomatic immunity. Receipt 3, the market verdict. The screens don't lie. Look at the tape. The moment the SEC filing dropped, U.S. Treasury yields spiked by 18 basis points. That is a massive violent move in the bond market. Why? Because the bond market suddenly realized that foreign buyers are going to stop routing their money through America. If the money doesn't come here, who buys the U.S. debt? Who funds the government? The U.S. dollar index plummeted 1.2%. Because the world no longer needs to hold as many dollars if they aren't forced to clear their trades in New York. Now look at the other side of the border. Canadian bank stocks, RBC, TD, Scotiabank surged 6%. The Canadian dollar rallied. The Toronto Stock Exchange hit an all-time high. The market is pricing in a regime change. The market is mathematically confirming that Toronto is the new capital of international finance. Receipt 4, the Federal Reserve panic. At 5:00 p.m., Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, reportedly requested an emergency secure phone call with the White House. According to 2 sources within the Fed, Powell delivered a terrifying message. He told the administration that the 2% capital tax had just triggered a structural unanchoring of the U.S. financial system. The Fed understands what Trump does not. The power of the United States doesn't come from its military alone. It comes from the fact that everyone in the world has to use our banking system. If we sanction a country, they starve because we control the clearinghouses. By taxing the clearinghouses, Trump just forced the banks to build a new one in a foreign country out of our reach. Powell told the White House, "You haven't just lost tax revenue, you have lost the control panel of the global economy." Segment 3, the psychological breakdown. Let me explain why this defection is fundamentally historically different from a factory moving. When a factory moves to Mexico or Canada, it hurts. You lose jobs, you lose tax revenue, but you can build another factory. When your financial architecture moves, you lose your empire. Trump views the world through the lens of real estate and 1980s protectionism. He sees leverage. He sees a tenant he can squeeze for higher rent. He believes that because America has the biggest economy, global finance is a captive audience. He thinks Wall Street has nowhere else to go. But capital is not a building. Capital is water. If you put a rock in a stream, the water doesn't stop. It just flows around the rock. Trump made himself the rock, and Mark Carney dug the new river. Carney is the ultimate foil to Trump. Trump relies on bluster, intimidation, and executive orders written in Sharpie. Carney relies on regulatory architecture, legal frameworks, and an absolute mastery of central banking mechanics. Carney saw Trump's Capital Act coming months ago. He knew that the moment Trump tried to tax the plumbing of the financial system, the banks would panic. So Carney didn't just wait. He prepared the landing zone. He pre-cleared the regulatory hurdles. He drafted the legislation. He waited for Trump to push the banks off the cliff. And he was standing at the bottom with a safety net and a signed contract. Trump tried to extort Wall Street. Carney offered to host them, and the spreadsheets won because spreadsheets always win. In the long run, math beats ego, and competence beats chaos every single time without exception. The CEOs of the Big Four banks are not anti-American. They are deeply patriotic capitalists. But their patriotism ends where systemic risk begins. They looked at Donald Trump and they saw a man willing to destroy the US dollar to win a news cycle. They looked at Mark Carney and they saw a man who understands that predictability is the most valuable currency on earth. They chose predictability. Segment 4: The consequences for you. Let me bring this directly into your bank account, into your mortgage, into your retirement fund, your interest rates. Because global capital is no longer forced to flow through New York, the demand for US dollars is going to structurally decline. When demand for the dollar drops, its value drops. When the value of the dollar drops, inflation rises. To fight that inflation, the Federal Reserve will be forced to keep interest rates higher for longer. That means your mortgage rate stays at 7% or climbs to 8%. Your credit card APR goes up. Your auto loan becomes unaffordable. You are going to pay higher interest rates for the next decade to compensate for the fact that Trump drove global capital out of the country. Your retirement, if you have a 401k, it relies on the supremacy of U.S. financial markets. As international capital routes through Toronto, liquidity in U.S. markets will thin out. Thinner markets mean more volatility. It means foreign investors won't automatically default to buying U.S. equities. The structural premium that U.S. stocks have enjoyed for 50 years because everyone had to buy them is over. America's national security. This is the consequence the Pentagon is terrified of. For 20 years, America's greatest weapon hasn't been the aircraft carrier. It has been financial sanctions. When we wanted to punish Iran or Russia or North Korea, we cut them off from the New York clearinghouses. We froze them out of the global economy. We can't do that anymore. If the global clearing architecture is sitting in Toronto under Canadian sovereign law, the U.S. Treasury Department cannot unilaterally block a nation's funds. We have to ask Canada for permission. Let me repeat that. The United States of America will now have to ask Mark Carney for permission to sanction its own adversaries. We traded our financial hegemony for a 2% tariff that we aren't even going to collect. Segment 5, the domino forecast. Let me show you what happens next because the banks moving their servers is just the first crack in the dam. Scenario A, the European pivot. London and Frankfurt are watching this. The European Central Bank has resented America's weaponization of the dollar for a decade. Now that the big four U.S. banks have established a safe, tax-free clearing hub in Toronto, the European banks, Deutsche Bank, Barclays, BNP Paribas, will immediately route their North American transactions through Canada. The U.S. financial system becomes an island. Global finance continues without us. Scenario B, the Treasury funding crisis. Within 12 months, the U.S. Treasury attempts to auction off $2 trillion in new debt to fund the government. But the foreign buyers aren't there. They are clearing their trades in Toronto, buying Canadian bonds, Commonwealth bonds, and European debt because it's cheaper and insulated from U.S. taxes. The U.S. government is forced to dramatically raise the interest rates on its own debt just to find buyers, triggering a sovereign debt spiral. Trump's attempt to tax the world ends up bankrupting the U.S. government. Scenario C, the new Bretton Woods. Carney leverages the Toronto hub to establish a new global financial architecture. He invites the UK, Australia, the EU, and Japan to formalize the Commonwealth European Liquidity Pact. It replaces the US dollar C-centric system with a multipolar clearing network managed out of Ottawa and London. The United States is left with a choice: submit to the new Canadian-led global standards or completely isolate the U.S. economy behind a wall of tariffs and capital controls. Trump wanted to control the world's money. He just ensured that the world's money is controlled by everyone except the United States. Segment 6, the verdict. Let me give you one final image. This evening, as the markets closed, a massive transition occurred in the server farms of New Jersey. Technicians from J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs literally flipped physical switches. They rerouted the algorithmic trading flows. The data traffic on the fiber optic lines running from New York to London plummeted. The data traffic on the lines running from New York to Toronto spiked 4,000%. There were no moving trucks. There were no physical boxes being carried out of buildings. The buildings on Wall Street look exactly the same tonight as they did yesterday. The logos are still on the skyscrapers. The brass plaques are still polished. But the buildings are empty vessels. The ghost has left the machine. The trillions of dollars that made those buildings matter are gone. They are sitting on servers in a tech park outside of Toronto, managed by algorithms complying with Canadian law, overseen by a Canadian Prime Minister who understood exactly how to break an American president. Not because Canada is inherently more powerful than America, but because America under Donald Trump became too dangerous for its own institutions. Trump told you that America first would make the world bow to our financial might. Instead, it sent the architects of American capitalism to a country that offered the one thing America no longer could: stability. The CEO of a major Wall Street bank, speaking anonymously to the Wall Street Journal this afternoon, was asked why he made the call to move the clearing operations. He didn't talk about politics. He didn't talk about patriotism. He said 6 words: "We go where capital is welcome. We go where capital is welcome." Capital is not welcome in Trump's America. It is taxed. It is threatened. It is held hostage to fund political grievances. Capital is welcome in Carney, Canada. It is protected. It is given a legal framework and a tax-free corridor and a guarantee that the rules won't change because the president got angry at 3 a.m. The country that built the modern global economy is watching the control panel be unscrewed from its own wall and shipped north by a man who promised to make America great and made it uninvestable instead. Close call to action. I want to hear from you. Are the Big Four banks traitors for moving their global clearing to Canada? Or are they doing exactly what their shareholders demand when a government makes business impossible? Is Mark Carney the architect of a new global order, or just the guy catching our fumbles? And the question that should terrify every American: if our own banks don't trust our financial system, why should anyone else? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Every single one. This channel has been tracking the dismantling of the American empire in real time. The mainstream media is going to spend tomorrow debating the politics of this tax. They are going to miss the reality. The money is already gone. The switches have been flipped. The fiber optic lines are rerouted. Subscribe. Hit the bell. Send this to anyone who has a 401k, who pays a mortgage, or who still thinks tariffs are paid by foreigners. Because tomorrow morning, Trump is going to wake up, see the US dollar dropping, and he is going to rage. He is going to call Jaime Dimon a traitor. He is going to threaten Mark Carney, and every time he hits send, another $1 billion will quietly flow north across the border. He is not fighting Carney. He is not fighting Wall Street. He is fighting gravity, and gravity always wins. Don't blink.